doubt people are watching C-SPAN, so I'm just trying to give this more exposure because I think a lot of people might not be aware that this is serious debate within our legislative branch, and this stuff is coming down the pipeline. If you have children and you care about being a parent and giving them any guidance as far as how they should best live their life, that role is being taken from you by the government and the doctors. So big medical and big government are now in charge of what happens to your kids, the kids that you made and you care for and are responsible for, only up to a point. The government will take care of the rest.
Thank you. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on the dangers and due process violations of gender-affirming care for children.
I have a point of order.
Yes, ma'am. What's the point of order?
It is not the committee's practice to allow folks who are not members of this committee to sit at the dais without unanimous consent, and we do not give it.
I was going to seek that unanimous consent. The gentlelady from Georgia was here for the purpose of merely introducing the Republican witnesses. And it's common courtesy among colleagues to allow a member the privilege of appearing for that purpose, and I'm sorry that you object to that.
Sorry, too.
You insist on the point of order?
I do.
Unfortunately, it's not a debatable motion or one that is subject to a vote, so I will provide the witness introductions after our opening statements. I thank our colleague for her willingness anyway. I will recognize myself for an opening statement, and we'll get the hearing going here. Before I provide a few opening remarks, I'm going to play a 2-minute excerpt of a podcast interview with an individual named Dr. Blair Peters at the Oregon Health Science University in Portland. He calls himself the queer surgeon, and he boasts about the shocking, fully experimental, irreversible, and life-altering invasive procedures that he and others are performing on children to surgically modify their genitals. I want everyone to hear this in his own words, not mine, and take special note of the frank admission that no one has published any studies on these shocking procedures, and they are, quote, as he says, just kind of learning and figuring out what works, unquote. Later in this video, he admits to performing, quote, huge reconstructive surgery, rearranging anatomy, and then acknowledges that they know almost nothing about the outcomes for these children. And, quote, he says, we'll know more in 5 to 10 years, and, quote, it'll be fascinating to see how all these kids turn out. Wow. With unanimous consent, I will enter the link to this full video in the record of our hearing because everyone should watch it. It is absolutely nightmarish and surreal to hear the description of what these people are doing to the bodies of young children. Please play that clip, and I will say viewer discretion is advised.
So it is so weird. Conservatives, you know, traditionally were religious, so conservatives would be in opposition to any sort of legislation that would be altering your sexual reproduction. As you know, conservatives, Republicans generally are not a fan of abortion, historically. Now on the liberal side, or Democrats, they believe in body autonomy. They believe in the American dream. They believe in freedom. And that's being removed by the government taking the freedom to raise your kids away from you because they're a better steward of your child's body. So neither side makes sense. Anyone who's behind this is not a Democrat or a Republican. They're something else. They're a subversive agent that is in the mix, or a subversive group that is in the mix and are pushing these crazy policies to, you know, the floor of the House. And politicians are really debating legislation regarding this because this is happening right now.
So 80% or so of my practice is gender affirming surgery. So I do facial, chest surgery, and genital surgery. But the majority of my practice and sort of where my passion lies is really genital surgery cases. So I do a lot of vaginoplasty and a lot of phalloplasty. I would just say they're expanding in either direction. So yeah, a lot of adolescents presenting for surgical intervention, but also a lot of people that are like in their 70s sometimes coming in for genital surgery, and then everything in between. But the adolescents for sure present some unique challenges. Obviously, there's great evidence supporting pubertal suppression for a whole variety of benefits. But the one thing that is very new is genital surgery in someone that has underwent pubertal suppression. Not so much an issue in someone with assigned female at birth anatomy that undergoes a phalloplasty, because we're creating something with a free tissue transfer or a flap anyway, but a much bigger issue for an individual that's undergoing a penile inversion vaginoplasty. Because we use all of that tissue to basically create the vulva as well as line the internal vaginal canal. And as a specialty, those of us that do a fairly high volume of genital gender affirming surgery, we've maybe done a handful of pubertally suppressed adolescents as a field, and no one's published on it yet. OHSU we're just putting our first series together as we're kind of learning and figuring out what works. But it's really changing things because you don't have enough tissue to line the vaginal canal. So you either have to take a skin graft or take skin from elsewhere or use some artificial product. The way that we're dealing with it is by using a robot, and we're basically performing intra-abdominal components of the surgery. So we're using peritoneum, which is the inner lining of the abdomen, to line most of the vaginal canal. And by doing that, that allows us to use all of the remaining tissue externally to create a vulva and try to make also an aesthetic result.
So I'm going to...
So specifically, this is about kids. I want to remind viewers of that. This is the debate, is we're talking about children. If adults want to do, adults can go to war, adults can do drugs, smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, harm their bodies. Adults can do whatever they want. The issue here is that we are having conversations, teachers and other people of authority who are not the parents of the child are having conversations with young children, not just about sexuality, but about actually undergoing surgery and changing your body at a time when you're very impressionable. Think back to when you were a child. Maybe you wanted to be an astronaut or a cowboy or a dinosaur even. And you would go through these extravagant role play, play times where you would get props and you'd have a stick that was a fake gun or something like that, or you've got teacups and you're having, a party with your dolls. Children love to, they're very open to the world. And so as adults, it's our responsibility to be careful about what we expose them to, what we put in their minds, and what we prop up as being good and smart choices. And I don't think that, taking hormone blockers and doing genital reassignment surgery or a breast job or something like that on a child that isn't done growing, that just seems crazy to me. I don't know how anyone can defend taking a child away from its parent, doing surgery, and then giving the child back to the parent potentially, and you have to deal with all the care and the mental ramifications, the physical ramifications, and you didn't have a choice. They're trying to remove the parental role. I mean, they've kind of already done it with the two-income household. Has slowly been a push toward your children being cared for by someone other than the biological parent, because both parents are now working. It used to be one of the parents would be home with the child, and this was, America-wide. So this is a huge systemic change on a grand scale. And now you've removed the ability to parent and decide what happens to your child's body and tell your child no. Now the government says, no, you can't tell your child no. Your child now runs the house. Your child now, you know, can go to a doctor without your consent, and the system wants this so badly that I'm assuming that they will provide this type of surgery for free. Meanwhile, if I get cancer and don't have insurance, I go bankrupt. I have medical debts I can never get out of. You know, any legitimate care that is for a condition that you can't, that's non-elective, emergency care, you know, critical care for injuries or disease, that costs money. Sorry, but if your 6-year-old wants to do transitional surgery, yeah, sure, come on in, and keep the parents outside. They got nothing to do with this. This is between me and your child.
I'm going to speak the truth here plainly, and I think the vast majority of the American people understand and agree with what I'm going to say. What you've just heard there is a little sample of barbarism. This is the mutilation of children, and it should be prohibited by our law. This so-called gender-affirming care is anything but affirming and caring, and the language matters. This is adults deciding to permanently alter the bodies of children who do not have the capacity to make life-altering decisions on their own. And here's some more plain truth that everybody acknowledged until about 15 minutes ago. It's been plainly observed and fully respected by every culture for all of recorded history. Sex isn't something you are assigned at birth. It is a natural prenatal development that occurs when every unborn child is in the mother's womb. No one can surgically free themselves from this objective and obvious fact of life or free anyone else from it. But today, we see adults inflicting unspeakable harms on helpless children to affirm the adult's own worldview, that gender is somehow fluid, that sex can be surgically altered, that there are no lasting consequences of all this madness as a result of the sex change procedures. What is even more alarming is that this...
There are definitely lasting consequences. You're physically changing your body. You're cutting into your tissue. It's no different than the ramifications of losing a leg, losing an extremity, losing an eye. These are not reversible. Once you do it, we don't have the technology to go back the other way. Once you do it, this is a one-way street. And we're allowing children at very young ages to make crazy decisions like this. Listening to this makes me feel it just makes me very, very, very worried about what we think is right and good, and I can't wrap my mind around why we want to harm children. It doesn't make sense to me. Why are adults okay with cutting children up for no reason, just because they want to, you know, play pretend? They want to be something that they're not. An adult can do that, but these are permanent. This is not putting on a dress. Put on a dress, but don't cut your genitals off or change your genitals. I mean, children are not allowed to decide what they have for dinner. How is this happening?
The central tenet of the transgender movement and its allies is to exclude parents as much as possible from making decisions about the health of their own children. Medical professionals and schools increasingly see parents as, quote, transphobic bullies who must be prevented from standing in the way of the medical sexual transition of their own kids. We saw this in my home state of Louisiana recently, where Children's Hospital of New Orleans laughed in the face of a young girl's parents when they attempted to intervene as doctors sought to transition their daughter without their consent. To the left, these aren't your children, see? They are the state's children, and the state should be making the parenting decisions. Let's also be clear about something else. Even a parent has no right to sexually transition a young child. Our American legal system recognizes the important public interest in protecting children from abuse and physical harm. No matter how liberated you may be, you still don't have the legal right to ignore seatbelt safety laws or minimum driving age laws or drinking and smoking laws for your kids. No parent has a constitutional right to injure their children. Of course, the reach of radical sexual identity politics isn't limited to young children alone. We see this extended to young adults, especially at the university level now. The modern left applauds men competing in women's college athletics. We see universities captured by academics advancing this ideology on students across our country. Whether it's by scalpel or by social coercion from teachers, professors, administrators, and left-wing media, it's an aggressive attempt to transition the young people of our children, of our country. They're doing this psychologically, and now they're doing it even physically. Something has gone terribly wrong, and deep down, everybody in this country knows it. Today, we want to shed light on what this problem is, and hopefully how we can address the problem. Contrary to what some of my Democrat colleagues believe, the scourge of radical gender ideology is very real. The efforts to cover up what's being done to our children are extreme, and the science is on the side of what we all know deep down is morally and ethically right. I look forward to the testimony from our witnesses as we unravel the narrative surrounding this so-called gender-affirming care. And I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman.
Do we really need science involved in this? It's just the concept of, does a parent have the right to raise their child anymore? I mean, you can ignore, this is just setting a precedent, and it goes from there. They probably are choosing something that's not something that every child is going to want to do. And once they set precedent that the government and the medical field can override your ability to parent and decide how your child experiences, you know, the first stages of life, how they greet the world, what they learn about the place that they now occupy and the civilization that they're now a part of. If you as a parent don't want control of that anymore, or you want to offload that responsibility to the government, then I guess I understand why you're on board with this, but there's a lot of people that do care about their children and do want to pass their own values and ideas and lessons that they've learned onto their children, and they don't want the government overriding that and saying, no, you're wrong, you're a backwards bigot, we're going to raise your child right, we're going to make sure they're on the right track because you suck. I mean, why have a kid? Why have a kid at that point? You can't be a parent. You can't, you know, the goal is to make the next generation better. Take the lessons learned and distill them as best you can and pass them on to this little sponge of information and say, you know, these are the mistakes that I made. I hope that I can prevent you from making the same mistakes. And now they're just coming up with even new mistakes that no one even thought of. It's very disheartening.
From Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's be clear. Congress has no business interfering in parents' freedom to make decisions about appropriate medical care for their children. The idea that politicians are more qualified to judge the medical value or necessity of gender-affirming care than every major medical organization is absurd. Holding a hearing to substitute far-right ideologies for parental judgment exposes the rank hypocrisy of the party claiming to value individual freedom and small government. And so here we are before the Subcommittee on the Constitution and Limited Government. Make no mistake, today's hearing is not about protecting children or parents' rights. It's a cynical and frankly dangerous political attack on transgender children and their families, driven not by science or facts, but by polling and political strategists determined to mobilize conservative voters through fear. So let's start by setting the record straight. Gender-affirming care is safe and effective. It is supported by every major medical association, including the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Medical Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, among others, representing over 1.3 million American.
She's confusing the whole concept. It's not whether it's safe or not. Obviously, adults have had the surgery and, you know, are still alive. The surgery can cause complications, but they're usually not deadly. The debate is these are children. We're having a lot of conversations about children and adults doing some really weird stuff with children recently. And she is just, I mean, I can't believe she's taking herself seriously. She's saying that people that want to make decisions about their child are right-wing extremists. That's just anybody that isn't doing crazy shit is just lumped in with the right-wing extremist basket.
Doctors. It's just not up for debate. The partisans who characterize gender.
Everything is up for debate. That this woman is obviously thinking that this is some sort of dictatorship. The American republic or democracy, it's a republic, but sure, democracy is based on debate. Everything is subject to debate. That's the only way you improve things. This is how science actually works, is by debating and allowing other people to test your theories. Only then do you prove them. So this is becoming a thing in science too. When COVID was around, shouldn't say that, it wasn't up for debate either. That's the whole point of science. So they ignored the science and then told you to believe the science. They're not following the scientific process and telling you to believe their propaganda science, their BS science, their one-sided, non-debate, non-tested science.
Gender-affirming care as radical gender ideology are just repeating right-wing talking points to delegitimize critical health care. Access to gender-affirming care is essential to the mental health and well-being of trans youth. This care is
transgender community has the highest rate of suicide post-op. So even after they get the surgery, if you don't resolve yourself, if before the surgery you can't resolve yourself, your identity with your physical body, the issue is your inability to resolve these two things, not your physical body. Acceptance of the way your face looks, acceptance of the way your voice sounds, acceptance of your height, all your physical attributes. You can't change everything. So if there's a disconnect for you where you cannot accept who you are, how you were born, how you were formed, it doesn't matter whether you're obsessed with cosmetic surgeries or gender surgeries, you are never going to find happiness chasing that, you know, the world's going to fix me. Where's my pill to make me feel better? Where's my surgery to make me feel better? You are a beautiful human being, the way that you are. And if you do want to change it, you can do that as an adult. But you need to find first self-acceptance. And most adolescents go through this. I remember looking in the mirror and saying, you know, oh man, I don't like this, I don't like that. I went bald when I was 18, you know? A lot of stuff that you got to accept. I didn't choose to go get a toupee. I said, this is who I am. I'm going to be proud of who I am. And there's a lot of things about me that I have to reconcile with the way that I wish I was every day. Those are coping skills. And you're not developing coping skills if you're just going to a doctor and saying, fix me. So I cannot believe how lost people are. I cannot believe that this is a serious conversation. You know, it's gotten to the children. It's just insane.
Tailored to both the mental and physical health needs of patients, as well as their developmental stage in life. And the parents and guardians of these children are involved in every phase of decision-making. There's nothing radical about that. So when our Republican colleagues allege that gender-affirming care raises particular dangers or due process issues, that is fear-mongering at its worst. Picking on already vulnerable kids in order to stir up chaos that they hope to ride to success at the ballot box, no matter how...
This is not political. There's no way that this is political. This is about kids. You can't make everything about politics. This is about children. And she's saying that it's about votes. So now it's not even about the kids. Both sides are just using the kids as a tool to get more political power. That's even more despicable than the actual surface layer subject matter. And, you know, so, I mean, this directly ties in. This is actually what they're chanting in the streets. So we're watching a video about what's going on in the legislative branch, but this is what is going on in the streets.
Pride. Participants recently held a parade in New York City where they made it clear they're queer and they're coming for your children. Our first president would have swallowed his wooden teeth. No wonder parents are pushing back against gender fluidity instruction in public schools.
It seems like there's an obsession with disinformation, especially on the left, in the media, which is seemingly controlled by the left as far as I can tell by the ideology expressed by most of the media. So she's saying that this is gender reaffirming care that children need. Since when? When did this start? This is adults saying this. There's no children on the stand here testifying with their expert opinion, because guess what? Children don't have expert opinions. So even these adults that are testifying, there was none of this that happened during their childhood. This is all made up. This is all fake shit. And they want to push it like it's, we know. We just got done earlier in the video listening to the doctor explain, we're figuring it out as we go. We don't really know, so we take tissue from here and then take tissue from there, or skin grafts, or do all this, or synthetic products, or all this stuff. I mean, they don't even know how to do the surgeries, let alone the science behind it. There is no science behind it. This is all just a brand new thing that they're experimenting with. So if you want to call the science uncertain, then that's accurate. But the science is in no way sure of any of this stuff. And it's all bold-face lies.
How deceitful or dangerous those claims are. As a mother of three, I certainly never found myself at my children's pediatric appointments wishing for medical advice from the House Judiciary Committee. As a member of Congress, I'm appalled by the weaponization of our legislative process to inject politicians into the personal medical decisions of our constituents' lives. I strongly oppose any effort to impose ultra-conservative political or religious views on the medical decisions of American families, whether on matters of reproductive health care or parental decisions to seek gender-affirming care for a transgender child. I know that Americans can be trusted to make their own health care decisions without politicians invading their doctors' offices. And I believe parents and doctors when they say that gender-affirming care has changed children's lives for the better, and in many cases even saved those lives. Parents like the mother of a trans teen from Ohio, who shared her family's story with the committee. She told us that because her 17-year-old trans daughter had access to evidence-based, medically necessary, gender-affirming care, puberty was just another phase of a normal and healthy adolescence. She said, and I quote, "Forcing her to go through the wrong puberty and seeing the impact on her body and her mental health would have been agonizing for all of us. I don't understand why we would allow politicians to make medical decisions for our children." She's right. Banning access to gender-affirming care would violate parents' due process rights, and the federal courts agree. They agree that banning gender-affirming care for minors violates constitutionally protected parental rights, and that politicians should stay out of those decisions. I want to close by reminding my colleagues how much their words matter. By endorsing falsehoods and bullying tactics, members of Congress are helping to promote a culture of discrimination that has increased violence against trans kids and their parents. Cynical political opportunists should not be allowed to use the megaphone of the House Judiciary Committee to promote cruelty and disinformation, particularly when we know that it invites discrimination and abuse of trans children and their families. I must object to this callous and reckless use of this committee's time. And with that, I yield back.
Everything has to be framed in a political manner in order to keep the idea of the different teams going. So if you don't want kids to be doing gender reassignment surgery, especially without parental consent, which is what they're trying to do, then you're a far right wing, crazy, extremist, conspiracy theorist who believes that there's these dark, nefarious motives underneath, when really people like her just want what's best for the children, when clearly that's not the truth, because she is using these team speak type definitions and saying, oh yeah, they just want to ban this, they want to take your rights away. What's taking your rights away is taking your right to be a parent to your child away, and having the government get between you and your child, or between you and your child's doctor, and say, hey, listen, butt out. This isn't your business. This is between the government, the doctor, and your child. You are an external party, and you will hear our decision after we've had an adult conversation. You're not part of it. Your child is, you're not. So if that's not backwards, like, that's not Republican or Democrat, right? That's just common sense. Although it's not common anymore, so it's uncommon sense, because everybody's afraid to be like, hey, this makes no fucking sense. Everybody acts like, oh, well, it's so brave and smart. No, you are fucking with kids. And when Nick Marks responded to that chant, we're coming for your children, and he said, leave the fucking children alone, he had huge blowback. That's unacceptable. Yeah. Don't get in between the LGBTQ community and the government and your children. You are going to get cut out. And I mean, if you don't think that they can, look at what they've done. They've captured the entire educational system, and they've used it as a mechanism for promoting their ideals in the most open-minded and susceptible community, children. Children are completely open to the world. They haven't been closed off by being abused and mistreated by other human beings. The world is their oyster, and it's beautiful, and things like this are trying to destroy it, in my opinion. They're trying to destroy the innocence of childhood, where you're not thinking about sex, job, relationships, all this stuff that adults have to struggle with and figure out. Children are supposed to have a simple, relaxing, fostering childhood where they can grow into whatever adults that they want.
I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for an opening statement, if he wishes.
Mr. Chairman, today's hearing is an all-time low for the Republican majority. In my 3 decades in Congress, I have taken part in plenty of hearings where I did not agree with the choice of topic, to say the least. But I am absolutely disgusted by the Republican majority's bullying, bigoted framing of an issue that would otherwise be worthy of serious discussion. What we are witnessing today is nothing less than a taxpayer-funded platform for congressional Republicans to bully transgender kids who are already some of the most vulnerable members of our community. Things are already tough enough for these kids and their parents. A mental health survey conducted by the Trevor Project.
See, the parents are just the afterthought. We're focusing on the kids. The parents kind of just need to go away. We need you to produce the child, but we'll take it from here.
Found that transgender youth experience high risk of depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. It can't help.
Look up the statistics. Surgery does not fix this. They still have the same issues afterwards because they're not mentally dealing with the issues of body dysmorphia, which is real. I mean, these issues are not, they are real. Bodybuilders and anorexic females, anorexic people, all experience this same rejection of their physical body. This is just a version of it. However, in this case, only with the sexual dysmorphia is surgery like imperative. We need to get you fixed. The other ones, it's like, ooh, you got to start eating again. We can't let you just starve yourself to death because you think you're fat when really you're anorexic and on the verge of death.
that they are under siege by Republican-dominated state legislatures hell-bent on passing anti-trans bills. According to the Human Rights Campaign, more than 76 of these bills have been signed into law, resulting in transgender youth losing access to life-saving medical care, comprehensive and inclusive education, and activities, spaces, and facilities. That is why it is so infuriating that congressional Republicans are using their megaphone to single out transgender kids and their parents by labeling their very existence to be a social problem, practically accusing their parents of being criminals for seeking safe, life-saving, mainstream medical treatment for their children. The last thing trans kids and their parents need in their lives is for politicians in Washington to jump on the anti-trans bandwagon just so that they can fearmonger for their 5 minutes of fame. Let me be crystal clear. Government should not stick its nose into a parent's decision to seek gender-affirming care for their children. Indeed, it is almost comical that the Republican majority of what they have named the Subcommittee on the Constitution and Limited Government is holding a hearing allegedly on due process to argue that politicians...
I agree that the government should stay out of this. It's none of their business, and this is why nothing useful is getting done, because instead of debating and coming up with policies to make the country better and fix the financial issues and the division issues and mass shootings and all kinds of other stuff that we actually care about, they're wasting their time talking about government involvement with how you parent your kids, government involvement one way or the other with how your child decides to live its life, and then condoning the conversations that are had in schools that plant these seeds that might not otherwise be there. So this is not being addressed at all. When you have adults suggesting things to children, children are very suggestive. So I feel like this is just so one-sided, one-minded. We're not having a true conversation. We're having people express very crazy, extreme positions on one side, and I'm sure we're going to hear them on the other side too.
Not parents, should make decisions as to what medical treatment is best for their children. The legal theory underlying this farcical hearing is bogus, but you don't have to take my word for it. Every federal district court that has considered the constitutionality of state laws banning gender-affirming care has ruled that such bans violate parents' constitutional rights. These decisions were issued by courts in different parts of the country and by judges from across the ideological spectrum, including 3 judges appointed by former President Trump. I trust parents and medical professionals, not politicians, to make decisions about their children's health when it comes to gender-affirming care. And
he just said that. Maybe he should shut up and stop talking about it, because it's none of his business. The government has no business, one way or the other, banning or allowing. It is between the parents and their children. Why are you even talking about it? Why is this even a discussion? Because they want to get laws on the books. That's why, because this is political. It's not about the fucking kids, and they're so full of shit. We still listen to them, and, well, whatever. We need to get these people out. These people are toxic, ruining the country, and then accusing everybody else of being the bad guy. It's them.
so does the Constitution. That said, judging from the lineup of witnesses, it appears that there is no limit to the topics over which Republicans want to bully trans kids and their parents today. Undoubtedly, transgender youth's participation in sports will be discussed because Republicans think it is a winning political talking point. But the facts do not justify the fears that Republicans and their political allies gin up over the fairness of trans girls participating in girls' athletic teams, nor the further stigma it attaches to transgender children. What recently happened in Utah illustrates my point. Last year, Republican Governor Spencer Cox vetoed a complete categorical ban on transgender kids from participating in athletics matching their gender identity, which the Utah legislature sadly overrode. In vetoing the law, Governor Cox noted in a letter explaining his decision that of the 75,000 high school kids participating in high school sports in the state, only four were transgender. And only one transgender student was playing girls' sports. 1 out of 75,000. Governor Cox also noted a study that showed that 86% of trans youth reported suicidality and 56% of trans youths have attempted suicide. Let those numbers sink in for a moment. A majority.
The thing is that he's making it seem like surgery fixes these problems, and it does not. The science, let's believe the science. Let's read the studies. It doesn't support what he's saying. It supports the idea that if you are confused like this, but pre and post surgery, you still have mental issues associated with it. I'm not diminishing that. I believe that. I believe that these people definitely need access to medical care and someone to talk to understand themselves and to really develop a good position to understand what they're going to do when they turn 18. But doing this when they're not capable, if you want to do this, then 10-year-olds can go to war. You know, 10-year-olds can go elect for non, you know, they can elect for surgery, then they can elect to go to war. If we're putting the ball in the court of children, then let's say that they can make adult decisions all across the board, not just about this. If it was like that, it would still be ridiculous, but it wouldn't be such a clear tool that they're using to further an agenda.
Of trans youth in this study reported that they attempted to kill themselves. And out of 75,000 high school student athletes in the state, only 4 were transgender, an infinitesimally small minority of all high school students in Utah. Governor Cox's letter further described a sentiment that I sincerely wish his Republican colleagues on this subcommittee shared. The governor wrote, quote, "Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. I don't understand what they are going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live. And all the research shows that even a little acceptance and connection can reduce suicidality significantly," close quote. Parents of transgender kids want the same things every parent wants for their kids: to go to school without fear of bullying, to participate in extracurricular activities like sports if they wish, and to be accepted by their peers and their community. This hearing will only further put those things out of reach for those parents and their children. And far from protecting children, this hearing will only further stigmatize and endanger them, because it sends a message that transgender kids and their parents do not deserve the law's protection. To any transgender people or family members who may be watching this hearing, I want to say that Democrats on this committee see you, we appreciate you, we value you, and we will continue to fight for you. This hearing is a despicable exercise and a contemptible use of the subcommittee's time and power. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record, and we will now introduce today's witnesses. Ms. Paula Scanlon is a spokeswoman and an advisor to the Independent Women's Forum and the Independent Women's Voice. She's a former collegiate swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, and she speaks out about what it was like for girls competing alongside and sharing a pool and locker room with a transgender woman. Ms. Chloe Cole is an advocate and someone who has experienced gender transition procedures. After being diagnosed with gender dysphoria, she began to transition, and then she detransitioned at age 17 and now speaks about her experiences. Ms. Taylor Green had wished to note today that she had the pleasure of meeting and speaking with Ms. Cole last year when you bravely spoke out and spoke in support of her bill to Protect Children's Innocent Act in front of the whole nation at a press conference. So thank you for your courage. Dr. Jennifer Bowens is serving as the director of the Center for Family Studies at the Family Research Council. Her research focuses on identifying and advancing policies that will best serve the health and well-being of families and communities. Ms. May Melman is a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Law Center. She previously served as the Deputy Solicitor General for the state of Ohio. Mr. Shannon Minter is the legal director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. The NCLR advocates for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Ms. Miriam Reynolds is a licensed professional counselor and an art therapist. She's the mother of a transgender son and resides in the state of Texas. We welcome all of our witnesses, and we thank you for your time in appearing today. We'll begin by swearing you in, so if you'd rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You can be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered in the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask you to summarize the testimony in 5 minutes. You have a light system there, and you need to push the button to speak so we can all hear your voice. And Ms. Scanlon, we'll begin with you. You go first.
Good morning, Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Scanlon, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Paula Scanlon, a spokeswoman and advisor for the Independent Women's Forum, and a former NCAA athlete. I am here today to share my personal story. I started swimming at a very young age, and by age 8, I was swimming competitively, and by late middle school, I was devoting at least 20 hours per week to swimming. I gave up countless Christmas holidays, weekends, and social events to work towards my goal of swimming Division I, a dream that came true when I began swimming for the University of Pennsylvania. While I am not an NCAA champion, I hold the New England Independent School League record in the 400-yard freestyle relay, a record that has stood since March of 2017. In September of 2021, Leah Thomas began participating as a member of the Penn women's team. Leah, formerly Will, had personal best times in every freestyle event that were faster than the women's world records. Once the season began, Thomas was leading the country in multiple events, while only placing in the top 500 in those events on the men's team. Thomas later became an NCAA champion in the 500-yard freestyle, the first NCAA champion in our women's team history program. While many of you already know this, what you do not know is the experiences of the women on the University of Pennsylvania swim team. My teammates and I were forced to undress in the presence of Leah, a 6'4" tall biological male, fully intact with male genitalia, 18 times per week. Some girls opted to change in bathroom stalls, and others used the family bathroom to avoid this. When we tried to voice our concerns to the athletic department, we were told that Leah's swimming and being in our locker room was a non-negotiable, and we were offered psychological services to attempt to re-educate us to become comfortable with the idea of undressing in front of a male. To sum up the university's response, we, the women, were the problem, not the victims. We were expected to conform, to move over, and shut up.
China has those camps too. If you don't agree with the Communist Party, they send you to a camp and get your mind aligned. They take your kids and they trap you in basically a prison until you're like, oh, actually, I do want to be free. So I guess I agree with your ideals after all. It's not about the kids. They don't care about the kids. They don't care about this girl's experience. They're too busy up there. Those two people we already heard speak are so concerned with their own agenda that they don't care about the lived experience of the children who are actually being affected by adult policy and decisions, forcing this down everyone's throat.
Our feelings didn't matter. The university was gaslighting and fear-mongering women to validate the feelings and identity of a male. As an attempt to voice my concern about the situation we were forced into, revealing the unjust and unfair.
Men want to act like they're allies and they care about women, but it only applies if there is no transgender person involved. If there is, then the rights and feelings of men and women become second to the protected minority, and everybody is told to shut up and just accept it that this is happening. There's no debate. There's no, why is this fair that a 6'4" biological male is allowed to swim against women and destroy not just them, but also the existing world records. That's not fair. That's not right. But believe the science, because the science says it is. Just like when the religious people, back when the Black Plague was occurring, they said, believe the religion. If you've sinned, that's why you're getting boils and all over your body and dying. It's not any sort of science. That was the science of the day, and the science of today is being corrupted into just tools of manipulation, just like religion was. It is just being used as a secondary version of government. If you question the government, then they say, refer to the authorities, the scientists who are the priests who know everything. It's the same system. And if you're an atheist that believes in science, then I hate to break it to you, but you're basically adjacent to Christian, Muslim, any religion where there's fanaticism and deep belief in the absence of evidence. And we just know, we know this to be true. And it's all just don't know. Don't know it to be true. We've never seen God, and we don't know these things to be true either. And this woman is speaking directly against what the politicians are trying to tell you. They're full of shit.
Fair treatment. I wrote an op-ed for the Daily Pennsylvanian, the student-run newspaper. I approached this from a scientific, statistical perspective where I used my engineering background to discuss how Y chromosomes cannot be changed by any surgical procedure or systemic therapy. This biological fact lends itself to athletic advantages that cannot be mitigated by lowering testosterone levels, which are readily apparent in sports competitions and locker rooms. The Daily Pennsylvanian published my article on the evening of February 10th, 2022. Only a few hours later, my piece was retracted. I was given no notice nor reasoning. Again, I was silenced for my dissenting viewpoint and felt my First Amendment rights were denied by my university. This is representative of a greater issue, the destruction of free speech. Today, any discussion maintaining the sanctity of women's spaces is labeled transphobic, bigoted, and hateful.
Yep.
What's bigoted and hateful is the discrimination against women and the efforts to erase.
She is nailing it. She is nailing the fact that the free speech suppression comes from a place of belittling and insulting you. That's how they stop you from speaking, is they just call you a bad person.
Women and our equal opportunities, dignity, and safe spaces. One might ask, why do I speak so passionately about issues that seem hypothetical, or some may perceive as only impacting a small number of women? This is not hypothetical. This is real. I know women who have lost roster spots and spots on the podium. I know of women with sexual trauma who are adversely impacted by having biological males in their locker room without their consent. I know this because I am one of these women. I was sexually assaulted on June 3rd of 2016. I was only 16 years old. I was able to forgive my attacker, but violence against women still exists. Let us not forget the viral.
No consent. But consent doesn't matter. Children can't give consent anyway, so It's all irrelevant. This whole discussion is so fucking stupid. I can't even believe it. Like, watching this is painful.
Me Too movement that empowered female victims to speak up. It casts a spotlight on the widespread prevalence of sexual assault and abuse, including in scholarly and educational institutions. Individuals on this committee have previously stated violence against women is all too common. I am grateful for those members who have brought awareness to the violence against women in the past, but unfortunately, there's still much to be done. As a sexual assault survivor, many policies pushed today completely ignore my experiences and many women like me. I ask the members of this committee, please consider this issue outside the lens of political affiliations and understand the true impact of ignoring the realities of womanhood. Future generations depend on us. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today.
And thank you for being here and for your courage, Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Cole, you're next, and you can begin.
Good morning. My name is Chloe Cole, and I'm a detransitioner. Another way to put that would be, I used to believe that I was born in the wrong body, and the adults in my life whom I trusted affirmed my belief, and this caused me lifelong, irreversible harm. I speak to you today as a victim of one of the biggest medical scandals in the history of the United States of America. I speak to you in the hope that you will have the courage to bring the scandal to an end and ensure that other vulnerable teenagers, children, and young adults don't go through what I went through. At the age of 12, I began to experience what my medical team would later diagnose as gender dysphoria. I was well into an early puberty, and I was very uncomfortable with the changes that were happening to my body. I was intimidated by male attention, and when I told my parents that I felt like a boy, in retrospect, all I meant was that I hated puberty, that I wanted this newfound sexual attention to go away, that I looked up to my brothers a little bit more than I did to my sisters. I came out as transgender in a letter I sent on the dining room table. My parents were immediately concerned. They felt like they needed to get outside help from medical professionals, but this proved to be a mistake.
Look at how many people got involved with this girl's confusion, and it still resulted in a huge mistake. So her parents took her seriously, she took herself seriously, the doctors took her seriously, the school took her seriously, everybody was on board with this. And then ultimately, it was just confusion and her inability to properly express how she was feeling. A lot of adults have this problem as well. If you don't spend time developing language to express yourself, and children have not had that time. There are even adults that are incapable of proper self-expression and properly explaining how they feel to other adults, let alone asking a child to discuss such a nuanced and complex topic as coming of age. I mean, even removing the idea of being able to change it, just that process of becoming a man or a woman is very confusing, very tumultuous. I remember being mad all the time for no reason. My emotions were all over the place. I was, flying off the handle, and then I'm, just done with it, So these extreme ranges of emotion, probably if this was an option for me, I would have at least questioned it and said, is this the source of all my distress? Is it because I'm confused about my gender identity? I mean, life is complicated enough for a child, and we're just trying to overcomplicate it. Adult lives are the same way. I have trouble, the more complex things get year after year, it's more difficult to mentally cope with all the things that you need to do just to keep things rolling down. There's more things you have to do every year. As you get older, more things get put on your plate generally. Your life gets more complicated as you get more and more assets and things as you work, and then you bring a child into the equation. Your life is complicated enough, and it seems like because there's not enough danger in the world and everything's too safe, we are creating artificial strife and conflict where it doesn't need to exist. And we all could improve our quality of life by not engaging in constant combat. It's exhausting.
It immediately set our entire family down a path of ideologically motivated deceit and coercion. The gender specialist I was taken to see told my parents that I needed to be put on puberty-blocking drugs right away. They asked my parents a simple question: would you rather have a dead daughter or a living transgender son? The choice was enough for my parents to let their guard down, and in retrospect, I can't blame them. This was the moment that we all became victims of so-called gender-affirming care. I was fast-tracked onto puberty blockers and then testosterone. The resulting menopausal hot flashes made focusing on school impossible. I still get joint pains and weird pops in my back, but they were far worse when I was on the blockers. A month later, when I was 13, I had my first testosterone injection. It's caused permanent changes to my body. My voice will forever be deeper, my jawline sharper, my nose longer, my bone structure permanently masculinized, my Adam's apple more prominent, my fertility unknown. I look in the mirror sometimes, and I feel like a monster. I had a double mastectomy at 15. They tested my amputated breast for cancer. And I was cancer-free, of course. I was perfectly healthy. There was nothing wrong with my still developing body, or my breasts, other than that, as an insecure teenage girl, I felt awkward about it. After my breasts were taken away from me, the tissue was incinerated. Before I was able to legally drive, I had a huge part of my future womanhood taken from me. I will never be able to breastfeed. I struggle to look at myself in the mirror at times. I still struggle to this day with sexual dysfunction. And I have massive scars across my chest, and the skin grafts that they took in my nipples are weeping fluid today, and they were grafted into a more masculine positioning, they said. After surgery, my grades in school plummeted. Everything that I went through did nothing to address my underlying mental health issues that I had. And my doctors, with their theories on gender, thought that all my problems would go away as soon as I was surgically transformed into something that vaguely resembled a boy. Their theories were wrong. The drugs and surgeries changed my body, but they did not and could not change the basic reality that I am and forever will be a female. When my specialist first told my parents that they could have a dead daughter or a live transgender son, I wasn't suicidal. I was a happy child who struggled because she was different. However, at 16, after my surgery, I did become suicidal. I'm doing better now. But my parents almost got the dead daughter promised to them by my doctors. My doctors had almost created the very nightmare they said they were trying to avoid. So what message do I want to bring to American teenagers and their families? I didn't need to be lied to. I needed compassion. I needed to be loved. I needed to be given therapy to help me work through my issues, not affirm to my delusion that by transforming into a boy, it would solve all my problems. We need to stop telling 12-year-olds that they were born wrong, that they are right to reject their own bodies and feel uncomfortable with their own skin. We need to stop telling children that puberty is an option, that they can choose what kind of puberty they will go through, just so they can choose what clothes to wear or what music to listen to. Puberty is a rite of passage to adulthood, not a disease to be mitigated. Today, I should be at home with my family celebrating my 19th birthday, and instead I'm making a desperate plea to my elected representatives. Learn the lessons from other medical scandals like the opioid crisis, to recognize that doctors are human too, and sometimes they are wrong. My childhood was ruined along with thousands of detransitioners that I know through our networks. This needs to stop. You alone can stop it. Enough children have already been victimized by this barbaric pseudoscience. Please let me be your final warning. Thank you.
Today's your birthday?
It is.
You're beautiful.
She's not the only one that needs to be loved and not lied to, because that seems to be pretty much all the government does anymore is just lie. The media lies. We're just told what they want us to hear. We're not told the actual truth. No one's putting real thought into how to actually help people. They're just giving them the approved solutions for the problems that when they're presented, oh, let me open my book. Here we go. Surgery. Boom. We're going to transition you. How much money do they make off of that?
Beautiful, brave woman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Ms. Reynolds, you're next. You may begin.
Good morning. My name is Miriam Reynolds. I'm a licensed professional counselor, a fifth-generation Texan descending from a long line of conservative Christians, and I'm the mother of a transgender son. I'm honored to be here today to give my testimony and tell you the story of my incredible child. He recently became an adult, and I will still refer to him as a child. His name is Cameron, and he is 18 years old. He recently graduated from high school and is embarking on adulthood with a gap year before college. Cameron told us he was transgender when he was 11 years old. He was clearly dealing with something, but we didn't know what it was or how to help him. But then he told us. My husband and I had the same instinct to tell him that we love him no matter what and always will be there for him. We knew we needed to affirm him from our years in working with foster youth, but we had no idea what to do next. We were scared. We didn't know anyone who had a trans child. We had never even heard of gender-affirming care. I prayed that it was a phase, but already knew that it wasn't. The signs had been there all along. We just didn't understand them. We thought he was a tomboy. He refused to wear anything pink or girly and was the only girl on the boys' football team for many years. His best friends were always boys. There were a lot of signs looking back. As parents, all we really want for our children is for them to be happy and healthy. Prior to receiving gender-affirming care and socially transitioning, my child was not happy and was not able to be his true self. I didn't want him to have to face the struggles of being transgender, but I did want him to be happy and himself. At times, I grieved my little girl and felt as if she were gone. It was hard on me at first, but I was able to put my child's needs before my feelings and find him the care he needed. I could see that my child was happier and felt more and more comfortable the more he was affirmed. We were living in Colorado at the time, and through some research found a comprehensive program at a local hospital that provided health care to trans kids. We found him a counselor, immediately began trying to provide him with the best health care we could find. We felt very fortunate to have access to a multidisciplinary team of professionals who could help us figure out what options we had for Cameron's health care. I could not imagine having to manage legal restrictions of medical care in addition to talking to our extended family, all while learning ourselves about treatment options and caring for our child. Later that year, we decided to move to Texas. We began researching leading programs in the field of trans healthcare and were able to find a similar program. We chose to move to a town based on proximity to the clinic. We knew we needed the support of experts. We had an appointment scheduled before we even arrived in Texas or had any idea of our health insurance coverage. Our multidisciplinary team at the clinic consisted of physicians, nurses, social workers, psychologists, medical students, my son's counselor, the school counselor, my husband and I as parents, decision makers, and my son as a patient. We filled out many, many surveys and questionnaires. Myself, Cameron, and his dad were all required to do so. We had extensive interviews with social workers and psychologists who had requested a letter from Cameron's previous provider prior to our first appointment. The intake process was lengthy and meticulous. The process was daunting, but I was grateful that the team was so thorough. I want to make it clear that the care we received was slow, very thoughtful, provided with the utmost care and consideration. There was no rush, absolutely no coercion. lots and lots of double checking and making sure we were all on the same page. At the time, Cameron felt it was all moving too slowly. In retrospect, we can see clearly that it was the best thing for us to move so slowly on medical intervention so we could properly weigh the pros and cons. My son was asked at every appointment if he wanted to stop treatment or if he had any concerns about treatment whatsoever. Counseling was taking place the entire time. Cameron's counselor would also meet with the doctor and my husband and I before medical interventions were decided upon. The interventions my son has had with extreme consideration, consent, and discussion have been counseling first and foremost, puberty blockers, and hormone therapy. We have not even considered any kind of surgery, and my child is 18. If any physician or member of the treatment team had suggested surgery to us when Cameron was a child, we would have said no thank you and immediately gotten a second or third opinion. With the benefit of hindsight, I have no doubt that the healthcare my son accessed was life-saving. I'm grateful that we have had access to this incredibly crucial, medically necessary healthcare for us.
If you want to be a different gender, if you want to identify during school and do things that are not irreversible, I support that. That's fine. I mean, just as much as anyone else has the right to be themselves, you do as well. I just don't agree with medical treatment to children, unnecessary medical treatment to children in any manner, especially something as uncertain as this whole process, giving children hormones. So surgery and hormones, I do not think should be an option. I really don't want the government to get involved either way. I want, if there are parents out there that want to do this, it's you know, you either support parental rights or you don't. And I support parental rights to try and do what's best for your child. I believe that all parents will do that. And I think that the government just needs to completely exit the conversation, one way or the other. They should not be involved at all.
Our son without the interference of our government. Cameron is thriving now. He's doing better than he ever has. He has wonderful friends. He's dating a little. He's spoken out publicly and has the love and support of his whole family, including 2 grandparents who are staunch conservative Christian Republicans. We can all see that this is who he is. The grandparents don't fully understand what being transgender really means, but they love and accept him. I'm asking you today to please allow parents the right to access and consent for healthcare for their children. This decision should be made with parents, the child, and the child's medical providers without government interference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Ms. Mailman, you're next.
That's what's called a moderate view. That's being in the middle. Not saying, hey, ban it, not saying mandate it and put laws in place that make it so the child can go around the parent. Leave it as is. The parent is in charge of the child's medical care. It should remain that way. That's simple. That's something that everybody should be able to agree on. There's no extreme views that I'm going to be espousing about this.
You may begin. Push that button for me.
I'm May Mailman, Senior Fellow with the Independent Women's Law Center, the legal advocacy arm of Independent Women's Forum and Independent Women. I'm testifying here today. Title IX recognizes that providing equal opportunity for the sexes can mean recognizing inherent differences between the sexes. That's why the Title IX statute explicitly allows schools to provide different living arrangements for the sexes. So too in sports. In introducing Title IX, Senator Birchby explained that Title IX would not require sticking women on men's football teams, and that's why Congress explicitly asked that the initial Title IX regulations include reasonable provisions considering the nature of particular sports. And so for 50 years, the Title IX athletics regulation has explicitly permitted sex-based teams where selections for such teams is based on competitive skill or involves a contact sport. Importantly, the regulations also require that schools must provide equal opportunities for members of both sexes. Unfortunately, in April of this year, the Department of Education proposed a rule that, if adopted, would flip Title IX on its head. The proposed rule would modify the athletic regulation to let schools compete on teams consistent with their gender identity unless a particular school can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the Department of Education that this policy would be too unfair or unsafe. In other words, women are no longer granted female sports teams as a given. We have to prove that we need it. Of course, we do need it. Studies show that even testosterone suppression cannot eliminate the male advantage. Except schools are not going to be allowed to say that as a general matter, post-pubescent biological males playing women's sports puts female athletes at risk of injury and losing playing time, medals, and privacy. No, schools are going to have to prove to federal bureaucrats that allowing a biological male on a woman's team would be unfair or unsafe in this particular sport with respect to these particular athletes. No school is going to want to take on that litigation risk, and so schools are going to allow biological males to compete on women's sports. This will directly and overwhelmingly harm female athletes who are far more likely to be displaced by a male athlete than vice versa, and far more likely to face risks in private spaces like locker rooms. And even if it were a good idea to reduce educational opportunities for women like this, the Department of Education may not do so unless this body has authorized it. But Congress has done no such thing. The Department of Education says that the Supreme Court's decision in Bostick versus Clayton County means it can pretend that Title IX addresses gender identity, but the Department of Education is wrong. In Bostick, the Supreme Court said that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits employers from firing someone just because they are transgender. The decision says that an employee's sex is not relevant to the selection, evaluation, or compensation of employees. Athletics and education, however, is governed by a different law, Title IX. And when it comes to athletics, sex is not only relevant, it is often dispositive. As superstar Serena Williams said, men's and women's tennis are completely different sports. We live in a nation of laws and not bureaucratic command. That means the Department of Education must find its authorities in the laws that this legislative body has considered and passed. It may not use gender ideology to twist a simple anti-discrimination statute into a statute that reduces opportunities for women. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mailman. Mr. Minter, now you may begin.
Thank you. My name is Shannon Minter. I'm the legal director of NCLR. It's a legal organization that represents LGBTQ people. For my 30 years with NCLR, 20 years as its legal director, I've represented many transgender young people in cases involving discrimination and harassment in schools, in the child welfare system, the healthcare system, other areas. Recently, I've been involved in federal challenges to state laws that ban medical care for transgender young people and completely ban them from school sports. I really appreciate the opportunity to address this committee. You know, parents should have the freedom to make healthcare decisions for their transgender children. Parents want what's best for their children. Americans differ about a lot of things, but there is one point on which we strongly agree, and that is that parents, not the government, are best situated to make medical decisions for their own children. There's a lot of misinformation about transgender children, youth and adolescents. Gender dysphoria is very rare, less than 1% of the population. Most people in this country don't know a transgender person, much less have they met parents with transgender children.
So there's so few that no one even knows, most people don't know a transgender person, and yet we're going to fundamentally change the structure of sports to allow women or men to transition to women to compete against biological women when they are originally biologically male and they have high levels of testosterone and XY chromosomes. That seems like a pretty big overreach. I think the system could make some sort of accommodations that weren't just throwing out the rule book. The rules were men can't compete against women for good reason. And for just a few people, we're creating so much controversy and making so many changes. I mean, are we going to roll this out on a grand scale? If 50% of the population becomes transgender, are we going to allow this on a grand scale? Every single aspect of society, gender no longer matters. I mean, there are true biological differences. You don't need science for that either. Just look at a man or a woman. Look at a men's records in the same exact sports, running, high jump, fighting, and then compare it with women and tell me that there's no difference between the performance of male and female athletes. There's a huge performance difference. And you're only disenfranchising the women. So if you are a man supporting this, then you are going against feminist principles in support of the LGBTQ community. And they're making you choose sides because they want to put laws out about this. I mean, if I want to do surgery that puts me in a wheelchair, I made that choice, and some sport that requires you to run should not have to accommodate me and change everything about the rules to suddenly allow someone who purposely got rid of their ability to walk to now use a wheelchair to compete against people that were born just like me but didn't have my surgery.
For most people, most legislators, this seems like a new issue, but medical care for transgender adolescents has been available for more than 20 years. The very same medications being prescribed for transgender youth have been prescribed for other young people for other conditions for more than 40 years. There is a substantial body of research that shows these treatments work. They improve mental health outcomes, quality of life, social relationships, family relationships. They dramatically reduce suicidality. One federal judge, after a full trial, said there is now extensive clinical evidence showing excellent results for these treatments. Medical standards for these treatments, as has been noted, have been endorsed by every major medical association in this country: American Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Psychological Association, many more. These standards, they're evidence-based, They require a rigorous multidisciplinary assessment before diagnosing a child with gender dysphoria. They take a conservative approach to treatment. Those standards have been in place for a long time. They are not new. What is new is this recent massive overreach by state lawmakers to ban medical care for transgender youth. These laws, these recently passed state laws, they prevent doctors from doing their job. They prevent parents from getting the medical care that their children need. And that is why every federal district court, all 6 of them, after hearing all of the evidence, have concluded these bans violate parents' rights, they violate equal protection, and the claims they put forward to justify the bans have no basis. These decisions, as has been noted, have been issued by a wide range of judges: Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee. In every case, the state officials supporting these bans had every opportunity to back up their false claims with actual evidence. Each case, they have failed. These bans pose a serious threat to the health and safety of transgender young people across the country, and I urge the members of this committee to reject any federal attempts to replicate that harm. As a transgender person myself, I have benefited from decades of access to health care, legal equality, support, been able to marry, have a family, pursue a career, participate in my local church and community. It is very disheartening to see the protections that have given me and other transgender people so many opportunities to thrive and to succeed now just being needlessly taken away from young people. Healthcare bans conflict with medical expertise. They rob parents of their right to make medical decisions for their children. They have devastating consequences for young people's lives. Decisions about children's medical care should be made by the parents who love them, not by politicians who know nothing about a child's life or history or circumstances, and who won't be the ones having to watch a young person they love suffer the devastating consequences of going without needed medical care. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minter. And Dr. Bowens, last but not least, you may begin.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Scanlon, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Dr. Jennifer Bowens, and I'm a licensed therapist, clinical researcher, currently serving as the director of the Center for Family Studies at Family Research Council. Based on over 25 years of experience as a clinician providing trauma therapy to children and as a researcher investigating the psychological effects of traumatic stress, I'm here to express my concern about what has been termed gender-affirming care. I've considered it a privilege to practice, research, and train future clinicians and be a part of a discipline aimed at protecting and bringing healing to the most vulnerable in our society, which are children. But when it comes to gender transition procedures,
So this is Newsweek, and Musk quoted this, but this is their explanation. The association between transgender people and poorer mental health outcomes is documented. Multiple studies have observed association between suicide attempts and people who identify as transgender, with figures ranging from 20 to 40% within those populations. However, the study that Musk cites contains some important details that should be taken into consideration when looking at his claim. The study, published in 2011, estimated the mortality, morbidity, and criminal rate after surgical sex reassignment of transgender persons of 324 sex reassigned persons in Sweden for 30 years. Each of these participants was matched with 10 population controls matched by birth year and birth sex or reassigned final sex. Data which was taken from health and population registers in Sweden found that those who had their sex reassigned were more likely to have died by suicide, made a suicide attempt, or been psychiatrically hospitalized. The paper stated the highlights that post-surgical transsexuals are a risk group that need long-term psychiatric and somatic follow-up. Even though surgery and hormonal therapy alleviates gender dysphoria, it is apparently not sufficient to remedy the rates of high morbidity and mortality found among transsexual persons. So that's, Newsweek, I don't know. Can't trust any media anymore, it seems, but I'd say Newsweek is a fairly reputable source that is confirming what he said is pretty much BS. He's saying this is necessary care that's helpful. That is certainly up for debate and doesn't have enough evidence for him to be making that claim after taking an oath to tell the truth and nothing but the truth in front of this committee. He's engaging in speculation.
The field is not operating as a helping profession. Instead, it is actively causing harm. Historically, children have been treated as a special and vulnerable class in the psychological and research fields. Caution has been applied to children in light of the fact that they do not have the neurological capacity to understand lifelong decisions. Professional and research ethics tell us that we should proceed very cautiously with regard to interventions for children when empirical evidence is weak or the research methods are in the early phase, as with this case. We should avoid interventions that pose unnecessary risks, particularly when the symptoms are known to change with maturation. But risk avoidance is not what's happening with gender transition procedures. Instead, we have too many cases like Mike. Mike was 9 years old when he first saw a gender therapist. I was deeply saddened when I read his gender therapist case notes, where it was reported that Mike couldn't distinguish between fantasy and reality. Instead of investigating these symptoms, the therapist wrote in the treatment plan, which included puberty blockers, guidance on social transition, and education for future hormonal and surgical procedures. This treatment plan was enacted without regard for this child's known diagnoses of autism, possible OCD, and possible parental diagnoses, which were reported in the case notes. Mike is just one example of how so-called gender-affirming care is in direct opposition of our knowledge regarding development and our understanding of good research and treatment. And there are many reasons why I have concerns, but I'll just share a few with you. One, these interventions are being endorsed based on consensus, not evidence. In the case of gender-affirming care, the term evidence-based does not mean that this practice is standing on the merits of solid research findings addressing gender dysphoria. Instead, it refers to a vote by those who are ideological supporters of the practice. Compared to other psychological disorders found in the DSM-5 TR, gender dysphoria is currently being treated with the most invasive interventions connected to a psychological issue with the lowest quality of evidence to support that practice. And two, the success rates of non-intervention for gender dysphoria for children already exceed what most psychological interventions have. In most cases, 85% or more of those experiencing gender dysphoria will desist if they are left alone. This is a higher rate than most well-established and researched psychological interventions, and with success rates this high, it is actually unethical to intervene. Three, the research and practice around this issue does not properly account for competing diagnoses and variables. So in one example, a report from the UCLA Williams Institute found that 45% of transgender identifying people reported childhood sexual abuse. As a trauma clinician, I can tell you that when someone experiences sexual trauma, it is not uncommon for that person to hate parts of their body or want to get rid of those aspects of themselves that made them vulnerable to abuse. And four, it is often claimed that a failure to provide these interventions increases the risk for suicide. This approach is actually unethical, and it's a clear departure from the practice of empowerment and self-management, which are important goals of mental health practice. This claim is also not supported by the literature. Despite years of empirical study, there is no definitive understanding of the etiology in the suicide literature. Five, after a review of the literature, other countries have actually backed away from gender transition procedures, and the list now includes the United Kingdom, France, Finland, Norway, Australia, and Sweden. And six, gendered affirming care has created a monopoly on treatment options, as it demands that it is the only way to treat gender dysphoria. By comparison, we can look at Cochrane collaboration, for example. There are 245 meta-analytic reviews of varied treatment options for depression. Yet when it comes to gender dysphoria, there's only one path currently prescribed to help someone, and that's to become someone else. Researchers and clinicians should be innovating solutions to heal distress, not coercing kids onto a path that tells them that they need to remove or change physical parts of who they are in order to be whole. This is why I'm calling on you to act on behalf of children. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for that buzzer background noise. Didn't rattle you at all. We will now proceed on to the 5-minute rule with questions, and the chair recognizes first the gentlewoman from Wyoming for 5 minutes.
First of all, I want to say thank you for being here. You are 4 incredibly brave women, and you're my...
Just as a side note, not every therapist is good at their job. Not every home builder is good at their job. Some people really suck at their jobs, and some people also bring their ideology and their politics into their practices and are not being genuine when they're saying they're trying to help. They are furthering their own beliefs through giving you guidance, and you listen to them because they're an expert. So you can't just trust that every therapist that weighs in on this type of topic really knows their ass from their elbow.
Heroes. You have been willing to put yourselves out there to address something that many people want you to stop talking. They want to prevent you from talking. Don't listen to them. Make sure that you continue to use your voice to educate us, to educate the American people, because these children are worth saving. Dr. Bowens, I want to thank you for being here. And in your testimony, you referenced what I think is one of the more important points in this debate, and that children are treated as special and a vulnerable class in the psychological and research fields. You referenced the experience of Tuskegee, and to me, the important takeaway here is that controversial so-called healthcare practices, treatments, and experience have not always withstood the test of time. Outside of your reference, I think of how lobotomy was once a form of care we wouldn't even consider today, and in fact has been banned in countries throughout the world. In this debate, I have wanted to replace the misleading terminology, gender-affirming care, especially as it relates to children, because one, it replaces the biological reality of sex, and two, because it falsely suggests that using the term affirming that there is anything good going on here. There are only 2 sexes, boys are girls, or boys are boys, yet girls are girls, and one cannot become the other. In fact, and especially when it comes to children, it seems to me that gender-affirming care is better described as sexual lobotomy. It is treatment that is fundamentally and permanently alters the sexuality and medical and psychological well-being of these patients. It causes irreversible sterilization and serious long-term medical complications and long-term reliance on pharmaceuticals. These treatments and surgeries are controversial medical practices that seek to change a person in a manner which is not actually achievable, and they will not withstand the test of time. Dr. Bowens, are there medical professionals in the U.S. and abroad already rejecting these surgeries as any form of serious medical care?
Yes, thank you for your question. And we are seeing an increase of medical professionals speaking out. Just this past week, there were 21 doctors that came out and said, we are very concerned about this. The own AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, was referenced earlier, and 80% of their membership has been asking for a review of the literature, and they've been denied that review by the upper echelon. So there are, and I listed many other countries, there are people who are standing up because they're seeing the harms done to these kids like Chloe Cole.
If we were going to do something this fucking crazy, there should be a broad consensus amongst people from very diverse backgrounds, and also the majority of the country should be behind this. And that's not the case. So, I mean, I think, I don't want to go on forever about this. I think we've seen enough of this. If you want to watch the rest of it, you can do so. I just wanted to you know, repost the fact that this is going on, and hopefully people that wouldn't otherwise see it are going to see this video. But this is something that we need to pay attention to, because if you don't, it's going to happen without you. They're going to railroad this thing through, pretty much guarantee it. They'll bundle it in some stupid financial bill as some sort of you know, back-end trade-off, and next thing you know, you will lose your parental rights. So hopefully you guys are willing to reach out and stand up and push back against this, because there should not be legislation regarding this. So speak to your state legislators, speak to your national representatives in the state that you live, and you know, try and let them know that there are people out there that are not on board with this, because silence is going to be taken as agreement. Take care, guys.